A warm welcome to all of you. My name is Robert Dijkgraaf. I'm the director and Leon Levy professor here at the Institute. I'm so happy to be able to speak again to a live audience and you know, 3 dimensions. It gets some time to get used to it. Today is our opening day. The plan is that we'll have a presentation by me about the history, essentially, of the Institute, which you might find quite interesting because a lot of stuff happened here in this small field in central New Jersey. And then we have 4 faculty members say something about how the 4 schools at the Institute work. And then, of course, we get to the most important part, which is the food and drinks outside and lovely weather. And it's so, first of all, often when I go to a new city or something, I want to find one of these signs that says, you know, you are here, just to get an indication what is actually, you know, where am I? What happened here? And so I think my aim is to bring you a little bit up to speed about the Institute and its history. And of course, you know, we are very proud that we have been essentially open during the pandemic last year too, although there were some restrictions. And, you know, I'm very fond of this particular article from the 1941 New York Times Magazine, Seeking Eternal Truth in a World of Chaos, particularly like the large looming shadow of Einstein on the blackboard. But basically, I think this is what the Institute always has been, a place of seclusion, a place where you can think deeper and undisturbed about the big issues, even when the world is in turmoil, or perhaps because the world is in turmoil. In some sense, I would say, Bible or founding documents of the Institute is this wonderful essay by Abraham Flexner, The Usefulness of Useless Knowledge. We published it a few years ago. That was published in 1939. Of course, you know, in a very bad time for the world. But he has been thinking about this for a long time. So I want to start by telling you something about Abraham Flexner, who was the founding director, and his ideas. So when he passed away, this is the New York Times editorial page in 1959. It says that he was instrumental in influencing philanthropic foundations to endow more than $500 million to education, opening doors to research and experiment. No other American of his time has contributed more to the welfare of his country and humanity in general. These are big words, and of course, many people do not know who Abraham Flexner is. So, hic transit gloria. But he was a very interesting character. He came from this Jewish family of Louisville, Kentucky, who really suffered bad in the crash of the 1870s. The oldest brother, Jacob, was at some point able to have Abraham, the first to go to college. And he went to the Johns Hopkins University. It was just created around that time. He was age 17. The president was Daniel Court Gilman, who came from Berkeley. Berkeley, actually, at that point was largely an agricultural institution. He had grand ideas about building research universities, like the famous German and English and France were in Europe. And but then he moved to Johns Hopkins. That was the first university actually in the US that had research in its mission, written in its mission. Flexner only had money for 2 years. He talked to the president, was okay, and he graduated in classics, went back to his hometown, started a school, and got into the headlines by failing all the students in the first year. In fact, the 2 of his other brothers became quite famous. Simon Flexner, a famous virologist, first president of what now is Rockefeller University. Bernard Flexner, great diplomat and philanthropist. Flexner actually very soon started his own school, Mr. Flexner School, and presidents at major universities start to notice that they got lots and lots of boys, of course, in those times, often, from this one school in Louisville. And he rose to fame, and he became an important influencer. In fact, he really became famous when his brother Simon suggested him as the chair of a committee for the Carnegie Foundation that looked at medical education in the United States and Canada. It was the Flexner report is a very influential report. It led to the closure of more than half the medical schools, increased basic sciences in laboratory courses, made actually a bachelor degree a necessary ingredient, eliminated a lot of the alternative medicine. Sometimes I joke, all of those do committee work, and we should have a unit to see how effective our committee work were. And I proposed the Flexner. And then, if you have a milli Flexner or a micro Flexner, you're already quite lucky. I must say Flexner also recently has been reviewed and seen from a very different perspective. Because one thing that led by the Flexner report, that he had very racial ideas, and particularly the closure of Black medical schools had a tremendous setback on both the healthcare and the education of Black Americans. So some of the major institutions actually have recanted the association with Flexner, but I would say his record is mixed, but he was really truly very influential in that report, though not a medical doctor himself. In 1929, he is a lecturer, the Rhodes Lecturer at All Souls College in Oxford, and he travels a lot around the world. And his theme is universities, American, English, and German. And that sequence is deliberate. He feels that American universities are failing, English are okay, but Germans, particularly with their heavy focus on research, are a prime example for the future. And he writes, for instance, about Columbia University at that time, which had courses in practical poultry raising and beekeeping. And there was a general, very applied, very practical attitude of American universities. Things changed when, in 1929, representatives of the Bamberger family came to him, and with actually the original idea was to create a medical school, particular medical school which was a time of great anti-Semitism, which had no ethnographic or racist quota. But Flexner was able to say, well, there's no need for such a school. There already exists something like that. It's called Rockefeller. It's run by my brother. I have a much better idea. I want to create a place exclusively dedicated to scholarship, and that doesn't exist in this country. And famously, the Bambergers approved under the condition that he actually leads it. And Flexner's wife says to him, well, you have been criticizing people your whole life. Now you should give others the opportunity to criticize you. And he was criticized. So these were the founders, Louis Bamberger and his sister, Carolyn Bamberger, who was married to Felix Fuld, which was the business partner of Bamberger. They had a great department store, the Bamberger store in Newark. Newark at that time was a bustling city. There's some beautiful old reels you can find on YouTube in 1926. They had many innovations. It was a huge store. They had a Thanksgiving parade. And in October 1929, the Bambergers sell their store to Macy's. And so when the Wall Street crash happens, they were one of the few actually have cash in their hands. And that's why they were able to do significant philanthropy in a time of deep economic depression. Their idea was to have this school in, as they wrote, Newark or its vicinity. Oswald Veblen, who was at that time the chair of the math department at Princeton University, immediately contacted Flexner and started to argue that Princeton is in the neighborhood of Newark. He says, well, actually, I've just built, he did, you can find on campus, the largest math department in the United States. Old Fine Hall, now Jones Hall, a beautiful large space. He says, so I have just the space for you to start your institute. And indeed, Flexner, who actually felt that the institute should not own property, should not have buildings or much staff, thought that was a great idea. They went in fact, quite remarkable, when this math department, Fine Hall, was built in 1929, already there was this famous inscription that you can still find. Subtle is the Lord, raffineerd is der Herr Gott, aber boshaft is nicht, not malicious, was already in the fireplace there, kind of somehow predicting that Einstein would actually be in that particular building. In fact, that Flexner was able to get Einstein to move here was quite a remarkable coup. Often people ask why Einstein was the most famous scientist in the world, why he could go to any place, why did he go to the Institute? And one little factoid is that actually in Berlin, Einstein was the director of what's now called the Max Planck Institute for Physics and a special chair in the academy. And there were literally one person working in the whole institute. So it was an institute that only existed on paper. And so in some sense, he moved again to an institute that at that time only existed on paper. But there were other arguments for his move. I'll come to that in a moment. That's in our archive is the famous note, "I'm all fire and flame for this proposal." This is a little clip of Einstein arriving in the US.
The greatest scientist of Germany in the greatest city of the world. I'm delighted.
I'm delighted.
What do you think of prohibition, Professor?
Ich trinke nicht, also ist mir das ganz gleich.
Professor, freut es Sie hier in Amerika wieder zu sein?
Wenn ich Sie sehe, sicher.
So this was 1930, a few years before he would make his definite move across the Atlantic, and Einstein would never ever leave the United States. The newspapers actually report with a lot of news items about this old dream, a university sui generis, this really remarkable. They also comment on the extravagantly large offices with fireplaces and everything. It was really a scholar's dream come true. Einstein and Veblen were the first, if those of you who signed the members' book have seen that were the first 5 signatures on the book are the signatures of these 5 mathematicians. Flexner started with the School of Mathematics. 2 of the professors, James Alexander and Oswald Veblen, were recruited from the university, so they were being poached. John von Neumann and Hermann Weyl both escaped Germany. Flexner also immediately started to design a seal and a motto, Truth and Beauty, which is, I think, quite touching. That one of the first active thing that he did was ask for design by a rather famous artist, Pierre Turin. Here are some notes for the first faculty meeting. The Flexner declared the institute to be open for its first session. The rest of us congratulate each other on the lack of formality attending this important occasion. So I hope you will say the same today. And here he writes back to the trustees, I use the phrase paradise for scholars, but we have 20 people here and already attained the rank. They've been turned loose in fine hall without any regulations. They know, of course, what they want to do, and they are doing it. So that was his philosophy. They say they're happy as birds doing precisely the things that they have wanted to do. And I hope you feel exactly the same this year. This is Felix Frankfurter, one of the IES trustees. Here was his note on another message from Flexner, news from paradise, he writes. Frankfurter at some point asked Flexner to stop using that phrase. He writes, I don't think it's very helpful to take too seriously the exuberant rhetoric of thinking of the Institute as a paradise of scholars. For one thing, the natural history of paradise is none too encouraging. As a precedent, apparently it was an excellent place for one person, but was fatal even for 2. At least for 2 when the snake entered, and the snake seems to be an early and congenial companion of man, and certainly in academia. Very soon, actually, the school of what then called humanistic studies was started, largely concentrated in classics and archaeology, because that was complementary to what was done at the university, but also, of course, attracting Erwin Panofsky, the most famous art historian at that time. And then a school of economics and politics, with basically concentrated on military history and political science. In the end, these 2 schools would merge after the war to what's now called the School of Historical Studies. Mathematics included physics, but that split off in 1965. And I will say something about the School of Social Science in its second incarnation. More recently, computer science and biology were added to the palette. Now, Flexner his favorite word was plastic, which means very different now, but it was like flexibility. I always wanted the institute to be flexible, no laboratories, basically no buildings, and he was both right and wrong, as I want to demonstrate. I must say, life at the institute changed remarkably in the spring of 1933, when, of course, Hitler came to power. All Jewish civil servants lost their job and were at risk of losing their lives. And there was an intense conversation that lasted roughly a month about Flexner and the other faculty, should we act or not? And then they realized that the mission of the Institute certainly was several orders of magnitude larger. And they all became part of this emergency committee in the aid of displaced foreign scholars. And with use of the Rockefeller Foundation, Carnegie, and others, small grants were given to European scholars that allow them to get visa to, in the end, make it to the United States. And you see, for instance, here, some of them, like Kurt Gödel, got a grant of $4,000. And sometimes it's been remarked that the Bambergers got their fortune in, in this kind of dealing with distressed merchandise, bargain basement prices. And now they were essentially dealing in distressed scholars. I feel the Institute for many was like an Ellis Island. So quite a few European scholars worked here, but many more came here for a short time and then found positions elsewhere. That's Gödel. Einstein and Flexner is a very interesting relationship between the two. When we published the essay, I wrote an introduction to it. I had the idea, well, why not have a quote of Einstein on the cover? Now, he must have said something nice about Flexner. It would be wonderful to publish a book with a quote that says, Albert Einstein, a book by my favorite author, or something like this. So I looked in the complete set of Einstein quotations, 600 pages, and I look up Flexner, and there's one quotation, and this is it. The former director of the Institute is one of the few enemies I have here. So my proposal was a book by Albert Einstein, book by one of my few enemies, but they didn't do that. So what happened there? Well, many things. They were completely opposite personalities. This is the telegram, it's in our archive, that Flexner sends to Einstein while he is on the boat crossing the Atlantic, telling him, disembark at, inconspicuously, make no statement, give no interview on any subject or newspaper, please keep cable absolutely confidential, so keep a low profile. When he arrives in Princeton, President Roosevelt invited him to the White House. Flexner intercepts the invitation and writes back, Professor Einstein is a very busy scientist, he doesn't have time for these kind of things. Einstein is very upset, and of course he didn't want to have a low profile. In fact, his profile really grew tremendously, and I like to say he crafted his statements as carefully as he crafted his equations. And he would go through many different versions, type them up, cut them out, and put them in a little wooden box. So I like to joke he was using Twitter 60 years before it was here. Actually, some of the wonderful source of these sources, this wonderful person, Dr. Joseph Schein, who just celebrated his 106th birthday in February. In 1933, he was a freshman student at Princeton. He was a Jewish student from a very modest background and got close to Flexner. Flexner became his friend and his mentor. He became close to all the Institute faculty that time, Albert Einstein and others. And Joseph Schein doesn't like anything more than tell stories about that period. So I find it really wonderful that we have an eyewitness, actually, of that very first year. And he's in great shape, and he visited us in April of last year, and he's doing fine. Flexner, indeed, then sees that the Institute was very important, as he writes when his last director's report in 1939, the center of gravity of scholarship moved across the Atlantic. And by the way, he first writes that these centers of gravity always move around the globe and never stop moving. In 2017, when the previous administration issued its travel bans, there was a lot of worry and distress here on campus. And so the scholars in that class, the year 2016-2017, organized a history working group and dived into the archive, somehow used I would say, the tools of scholarship to react to this. And you'll find many wonderful things they had displays. They, for instance, for Emmy Noether, perhaps one of the greatest mathematicians who came here, and many others already mentioned, Panofsky and Gödel. And you'll find a lot of documents also about the McCarthy area, how the Institute always was kind of in the middle of these kind of societal tensions. Pauli, another famous refugee, who actually got the Nobel Prize Physics in 1945. And at that time, one couldn't travel to Stockholm. So the actual award ceremony was in Fuld Hall in 1945. That's quite a unique event. Actually, at that event, there were speeches. There was also an impromptu speech by Albert Einstein, not written down, where Pauli says that Einstein crowned him as his successor. but it wasn't written down, and Pauli forever hated the fact that it was not documented. He was crowned, but it was not documented. It was some kind of a uncertainty principle working here. Of course, there are many ways in which the institute was involved in the Second World War. Here's Einstein with Leo Szilard writing the famous letter to Roosevelt in 1939, starting the Manhattan Project. Robert Oppenheimer was, of course, the third director, almost for 20 years here. He was at that time, perhaps the most, apart from Einstein, the most famous scientist. He is here on the cover on the occasion of becoming director. That's an excerpt from Life magazine. Here he is with Einstein. Here is he in his office, my office. We didn't have much space, so all the postdocs were crammed in one room at that time. But it was a great group of these 8 initial postdocs that he worked with. 2 Nobel laureates, 2 of the 8 were women. So it was a terrific group. Von Neumann was here, of course, in Gödel. In fact, the institute was a center for mathematical logic in the 1930s. And during the war, von Neumann writes, I'm thinking about something much more important than bombs. I'm thinking about computers. And after war, he starts constructing what we now think as the first modern von Neumann architecture computer, programmable computer at IIS, built, by the way, out of war plus material. Here's with Oppenheimer. And so the institute that never ever should have a laboratory once had a lab, and it created the modern computer. At that time, there were around 30 engineers here on campus working on this machine, which is now in our nursery school, Crossroads. So I love the fact that some of your small kids might be taking their first steps in the same place where the computer took its first steps. And also shows that, Flexner was right, you need to be flexible, but I like to say, even not fitting into the system should fit into the system here. I think that was perhaps the lesson. Because there was nothing, as people have written, nothing tangible here that was relevant to computer development except prestige and high hopes. Here is there's a wonderful book by George Dyson, son of Freeman Dyson, who passed away last year. About this, you can read more. It only had 1,000 bits of memory, and it was used to make the first weather prediction. I love the fact that the first weather prediction took 48 hours to predict tomorrow's weather. I think we're still struggling with some of our events, but today is terrific. And then there's this remarkable thing. This wonderful article can really recommend. Von Neumann writes in Fortune magazine, 1955, about the theme, can we survive technology? And actually 3/4 of that article, 1/4 is about nuclear arms, 3/4 is about climate change, natural climate change or human-induced climate change, but also climate change as a weapon, geoengineering. And he says some remarkable things to say. He said, climate will merge nations' affair more closely and thoroughly than the threat of nuclear or any other war. And he also has this very, I think, a very humble opinion that in the end we have to rely on patience, flexibility, and intelligence. This is from the person who basically discovered game theory. So the remarkable thing that this institute that should be far removed from the reality as possible. In 1948, you had Einstein, father of the peace movement, von Neumann, the coldest of cold warriors, and Oppenheimer, who was had an in-between position and was basically on the hinge of these two forces, all in one building. By the way, the first contributions to the war effort were made by the historians here and the political scientists. Edward Earle led a group, the famous Princeton group, that led to the whole concept of national security and modern strategy. And this group, essentially what they did, they studied, if I can say it, all the wars that Germany lost to kind of prepare from an historical point of view on World War II. So the humanists were there first. Of course, everything changed here in 1954 when, in the height of the McCarthy era, there were the famous Oppenheimer hearings. And he was again now on Time magazine's cover, but now with a different line, beyond loyalty, the harsh requirement of security. Many people say that Oppenheimer was a completely changed man after that. He was, but on the other hand, I want to show you a little clip from another thing you can find on YouTube, an interview aired in January 1955, so after the hearing by Edward R. Murrow, the famous journalist that was fighting McCarthyism. And he came to Princeton to interview Oppenheimer, basically to set the case straight, but it's essentially an interview just about the Institute and about scholarship. So I will show you a clip, and I have to warn you in advance, there's a lot of smoking going on.
This is See It Now, edited by the partnership of Murrow and Friendly, presented by the Aluminum Company of America.
This is the computer.
This is the computing machine at the Institute for Advanced Study, Princeton, New Jersey. It is virtually the only piece of scientific equipment at this institute. There is no student body here, just chalk and blackboard and books and scholars, less than 100 of them in all. Einstein, Bohr, Oppenheimer, Merritt, Woodward, Thompson, Lowe, Hetty Goldman, Kantorovich, Belop. In the past, the Institute has contributed much to the security and knowledge of this republic. The men of this institute probe far beyond the existing frontier of man's knowledge. This is a brief report on the work and purpose of the Institute as seen through the eyes and mind of one man, its director, Dr. J. Robert Oppenheimer, a physicist.
Dr. Oppenheimer, why don't we begin by your telling me a little about this Institute for Advanced Study, how it began?
Well, I'll try. Of course, it began at a time when I wasn't anywhere near, and it's already a subject for historical research. I'm about to find someone to see if we can find out how it began.
I've heard you describe it as a decompression chamber.
Well, it is for many people. There are no telephones ringing, and you don't have to go to committee meetings, and you don't have to meet classes. And it's especially for the few people who are here for life. The first years are quite remarkable, because most people depend on being interrupted in order to live. But the work is...
That's true. We do depend on interruptions, so it gets used to have this free space and time. I often like to say, like, no pressure is maximal pressure. In fact, the chair of the board at that time was Lewis Strauss, who was also instrumental getting Oppenheimer to the Manhattan Project, and then as director. He was the one that started the process against him, the security clearance. So when Oppenheimer returned to the Institute, he had a boss that still wanted to have him fired. And for several years, there was this very intense struggle within the board of trustees. But Lewis Strauss, pictured here when Einstein is giving the first Einstein medal to Kurt Gödel, and Strauss remained in that position, never was able to kick him out. And in fact, he himself, in the aftermath of the McCarthy area, also was badly hurt and lost many of his privileges. Some other people, George Kennan came here also particularly through Oppenheimer's work. The League of Nations, actually during the war, was here housed in Fuld Hall. There were here, you see Kennan and Oppenheimer with the Soviet delegation. So there was a strong interaction with politics at that time. These are Li and Yang, two young physicists. Oppenheimer brought a lot of young physicists in who published a paper in 1956 that was awarded a Nobel Prize in 1957. That is a record, many of us feel, proving that basically the universe is not left-right symmetric. So absolutely wonderful success. Oppenheimer was, the successor was Carl Kazin. Carl Kazin came from the circle around John F. Kennedy. He was in the National Security Council there, quite instrumental in the negotiation with the Soviet Union about nuclear arms. And he came here with a specific mission to create a school of social science. And when that happened, there was actually a lot of disputes. It appeared on the front page of the New York Times several times. I led to the wonderful headline, "Shootout on Mount Olympus." But in the end, I think this all calmed down. And I must say, this is the first fabulous four faculty members in the School of Social Science, and I'm extremely glad that both Joan and Michael are still around here to celebrate the success of that school. I'm just picking a few highlights, there's a long line of research about Islamic studies in the Middle East. These are two of our dear colleagues that we lost, Oleg Grabar and Patricia Krohn. This Robert Langlands in mathematics, great name. He was the occupant of Einstein's office for a long time. He just moved back to Canada. He insisted on calling it Langlands' office, by the way, instead of Einstein's office. And there's a wonderful line about studying that particular branch of mathematics, where I would say both the predecessors and people who worked on it were here at the Institute. So my point is there are long lines of research going through multiple generations that you're part of and that you should feel enriched by. We will hear a few moments, some more about the school. Let me say a few words about where you are. So these are our grounds. This is our academic campus. This is the Institute Woods. Roughly, the whole campus, roughly 800 acres, largely just the woods, which are protected. And it's wonderful to walk and be inspired. Often I joke, we're a little village in Gallia, and then only those who knew Asterix and Obelix understand but it is a little village, and I hope you feel part of that village. Of course, there's a long history of humans living in this area. There's the indigenous people who lived here. And in fact, the early American settlers talk about the many Indian families being close by. Actually, Princeton was created as a spot along the King's Highway, which basically went across the East Coast. It's now basically the I-95. And the Quakers, which were in Pennsylvania, moved north and about as north as you can as Princeton, and it was selected as a spot that roughly was halfway between Philadelphia and New York and was somehow hardest to get out of. So it was really picked as an isolated spot to be, in the woods, of course. There were very few people. It was settled by 6 Quaker families, and one of those was the Oldens. Olden Farm is actually the property that we're on right now. The homestead is now the director's home, Olden Manor of Olden Farm. This small part, I hope to invite you at some point to it. This small part here was essentially the cabin that was built there in the late 17th century. And the first Oldens lived there with 11 children that all made it to adulthood, which is quite special. And they write that their next door neighbor is an Indian family living 3 miles upstream on the Stony Brook River. Here you see the layout as it was in the early 40s. This is the construction of Fould Hall. Flexner really hated the fact that we had our own buildings, but Oswald Veblen famously said that no university or institute of higher learning ever regretted having too much land. And in fact, he comes from Norway. His family lost all their belongings in Norway through some legal procedures. And so he was quite adamant to buy this huge tract of land that at that time was as big as the main Princeton University campus and turn most of it into woods. Here's the dedication of Fould Hall. This is the path that you will see. There's now more trees, but if you walk from Fould Hall to the director's home, you're following in the footsteps many famous scholars, particularly Einstein and Gödel, who would walk every day at the exact same time. And local Princeton kids would know that and would stand on the corner of Mercer Street to greet them. So whenever you walk that path, think of some thoughts that as deep as the conversations between these two gentlemen. The member housing was built in the 1950s. I think it was very visionary. I hope you enjoy these apartments. Marcel Breuer, the famous Bauhaus architect, designed them. Another thing that was important in the Institute life is tea. I hope you enjoy it. It started from the very beginning. I like to say that some of the high points of the intellectual life at the Institute happened at tea. A famous example is a tea conversation in 1935, which led to Einstein, as it was reported on the New York Times front page, attacking quantum theory, but Einstein basically showing the remarkable thing of quantum entanglement that's now needed for quantum computers. So that happened at tea. So again, if you have a tea conversation, this is the kind of conversations I hope you will have that will change the world. The dining hall, the old dining hall was in the 4th floor of Fould. Now, of course, it's in Simon's Hall. The food is a very important element to us. Here you see the campus. It's not very big. Here's Fould Hall, constructed in '39. Very modest building, by the way. It was rather cheap, and you won't find kind of grand interior details. No big fireplaces and pool and other efforts. The beautiful historical studies social science library was constructed by Wallace Harrison, the architect that also built the Kennedy Center in DC. That was under Oppenheimer. Then the West Building and Simons Hall, Carl Kaysen built, which we upgraded. Simone Hall and Wolfenson Hall, where we're right now, Cesar Pelli in 1994. And then the Bloomberg Hall, which is added lots of space to 2 smaller buildings there in 2002. And you see the construction, which is the Rubenstein Commons, that will be finished this spring. And there'll be a common space, so it can be used for everyone. There will be social spaces, there will be cafeteria, a lounge, and a lot of smaller and larger meeting rooms. So we're very happy that that will finally come online. There are many houses here in Princeton, if you walk around, that have history attached to them. I told you about the rector's house. There's another famous house, 112 Mercer Street, the house that Einstein lived, and we think it's uniquely haunted because the 3 Institute faculty members that have lived there, all 3 earned Nobel Prizes. So it's vacant, so we're still waiting for the faculty member that dares to kind of deal and live with this tremendous pressure. We have a very active program here from the very beginning of artists in residence. There's David Lang, who's our current artist in residence, a composer who will, curates our concerts and artist talks. On the left, you see T.S. Eliot, who actually came here in 1948. Working, he saw everybody, all the mathematicians, writing complicated things on the blackboard. So he started to write his most complicated play ever, The Cocktail Party, which typically is seen as the worst play he ever wrote. So that's very dangerous, mixing artists and mathematicians. But he actually did earn the Nobel Prize during that year. So the magic of the Institute did work. Now, there are many outreach activities that you will see. We are, of course, slowly getting back into our normal life, and I hope you can participate in many of these because we feel these kind of social, the informal part, the soft tissue of the Institute, I would say, is as important as the scholarship that you're doing. Now, what is our community? It's kind of interesting. It consists of several layers. We have our faculty, of course, active in Emeriti. We have the members, 271 this year, and visitors. Then we have our staff that's extremely dedicated. We have our board of trustees, currently 29, who are also largely our most important donors. The Institute also has a local friends support group. It's very important to us too. And it's good to say that we are a philanthropically supported organization. Roughly only 10%, it might be even less, and shrinking rapidly, of our support, our financial support, comes from the government. The rest is our endowment, our annual giving, foundations, etc. So we live here, and I think we are blessed by that, because that means we are independent, and we like to say we can do whatever we want. Any rules we have here are self-imposed, and I think the fact that we can be, and you can be academically independent here, is to a large extent a reflection to the fact that we as an institution are independent. And then we have more than 6,000 alumni, the AMIAS group, and you all are by definition now part of it. They're all around the world, and we're very proud of this huge network. I'm ending with this quote, which is the beginning of the essay, The Usefulness of Useless Knowledge. I won't read it completely, but the last sentence I find very touching. The world has always been a sorry and confused sort of place, that poets and artists and scientists have ignored the factors that would, if attended to, paralyze them. So I want to end by saying, please do not be paralyzed. Enjoy the many goodies. I will say a few informal words during the reception, but this is the end of my presentation. And with that, thank you very much. And I want to give the word to my 4 colleagues, who I think it's best if they introduce themselves and say something about their individual schools. And Angelos, are you the first to start? Okay, please.
Hello, everybody. My name is Angelos Chaniotis, and I'm professor of ancient history and classics. I have been asked to represent the school because the school's executive officer, Susan Akbari, has a health problem and couldn't make it today. The School of Historical Studies is, in a sense, the fat sister of the School of Social Science. Fat in the sense that we have double as many professors as they have, but we are sisters since we have common origins and to a certain extent also common interests. Currently, the School of Historical Studies has 8 faculty members. 1 chair is currently vacant. These chairs represent art history with Yves Lambois, early modern history with Francesca Trivellato, East Asian history with Nicola Di Cosmo, history of science with Miles Jackson, Near Eastern studies and Islamic studies with Sabine Schmidtke, modern history or the Kenan chair, which is currently vacant, medieval studies with Susan Akbari, and I shouldn't forget myself, I already gave you my name, representing ancient history and classics. The members in the school, currently 51, come primarily from this part of the world. We have 51 members, 39 come from the US and Canada, and this is not good. 9 come from Europe and only 3 from Asia. We are trying hard to get more diversity in terms of the geographical range that is covered by the school. Of course, I should add that most of the professors that are currently working in US or Canadian university are not born in the United States, but still it is important to have people also from universities in Africa, Australia, and Asia. As regards our faculty, 3 out of 7 permanent faculty members are women. Members in this year and in every year represent a very diverse fields. I'll give you some examples of areas of research. They include ancient history, for instance, Caesar, ancient philosophy, the building of empires, art, gender, race, rights, religion, the material culture of writing, economy, and so on. These members and the faculty meet on Mondays at 12:30 in our lunchtime seminar, which is a lunchtime colloquium without lunch this year because it has to take in a hybrid form. Some people who feel comfortable in coming to the Dilworth room are physically present, others participate via Zoom. We will see how this works out. We had our premiere today. In these talks, which are open to the entire Institute community, members present in 30 minutes their current research, followed by 30 minutes of discussion, and these presentations are meant to be for a non-specialized audience, and they are very important because they provide members with feedback. The School of Historical Studies is not a school in the sense of a shared methodology or shared interest and topics. We never intended to do that, and there are very good reasons because this is how the humanities work. You may have people who work with manuscripts, who do archival research in dusty archives and other excavate in the dusty earth. There are people who work on climate change and DNA of studying old bones, and others who work on music, modern technology. We embrace every possible form of research and every possible form of methodology, and our products are also very diverse. They range from catalogs of finds to exhibition catalogs, publication of manuscripts, inscriptions, papyri, of course, monographs, and so on. The School of Historical Studies, prima vista, is the school of the remote, the distant, and the past, because most of the chairs and most of the interests are dedicated to other areas, not the United States, and other times not our contemporary period. However, there is continually an effort to associate our research with current problems and current challenges and questions. In a sense, history or historical research is a book that writes its author. What I mean by this is that while historians conduct historical research, they're influenced by the thing that they study, the facts that they study, and this influence makes them view their subject in a different way, and so they're in a constant dialogue with their own research. If a novelist tells you that their novel has not been influenced by personal experience, he or she is either a bad novelist or not telling the truth. And if a historian tells you that their research is not influenced by contemporary experiences, then you don't need to read their writings. They won't be interesting. The motto of the Institute is truth and beauty. And of course, in a sense, we also study truth and beauty. Only in the case of historical studies and social sciences, truth is not always beautiful, and beauty is sometimes fictional and not true. What characterizes us is empathy, the interest to understand human experiences, human passions, human suffering, because this is what makes the humanities and humanistic research important even today. And with this interest in the human suffering and human society and human experiences, I think that I would best pass the word to the social sciences. Thank you very much.
Well, Angelos, I'm delighted to be called the skinny sister. I'll take that anytime. I'm going to tell my own sister that. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here. I'm Alondra Nelson. I'm the Harold F. Linder Professor of Social Science in the School of Social Science. Good afternoon and welcome and on behalf of the school. As Robert mentioned in his presentation, the School of Social Science was founded in the early 1970s, and we are the youngest of the Institute's 4 faculties. We are the smallest faculty, numbering 4 permanent members at our full complement. And this year we had the great pleasure of welcoming a new colleague, the renowned political theorist, Dr. Wendy Brown, as the UPS professor, a foundation professor in the School of Social Science. Wendy, are you here by chance? I don't know if she's here there. Hi. Hi, Professor Brown, welcome. So Wendy is a scholar of extraordinary breadth and has made signal contributions to the fields of legal theory, feminist theory, social theory, and political economy, among others. We are so proud and honored to have her as a colleague and welcome her warmly. This year, Wendy will co-convene a special seminar in the school on political mobilizations and social movements, a theme seminar with my colleague in the school, Didier Fasson. And Wendy has just announced a seminar on climate crisis politics that she will co-convene with Timothy Mitchell, the Ransford Professor of Middle Eastern, South Asian, and African Studies at Columbia University next year. In addition to Wendy Brown, a political theorist and political philosopher, the social science school faculty includes myself, a historian and sociologist, Professor Didier Fasson, the James D. Wolfenson Professor of Social Science, who is an anthropologist and a sociologist. So Robert's slide mentioned 4 fields in the School of Social Science. So we do all of those things between us. And we soon hope to be bringing on a colleague specializing in economics broadly conceived, and a search is getting underway for that. We are also honored to have 2 founders of the School of Social Science still with us in our community, Joan Wallach-Scott and Michael Walzer. I don't know if Joan or Michael are either of you here with us this afternoon. Great. While the School of Social Science may be the smallest school at the Institute for Advanced Study, we are arguably the most multifaceted, covering a range of disciplines, methods, and approaches. In many ways, we are also among the most diverse of the schools and broadest in our disciplinary representation across the social sciences, as I've mentioned, but also the human sciences, as well as law and philosophy and literature. We welcome about 24 members and visitors each year from all over the world. This year, scholars hail from Pakistan, Bangladesh, Poland, Canada, France, Australia, Greece, the UK, Japan, the Netherlands, Turkey, and across the United States. This international group of members was selected from what was our largest pool, applicant pool ever in the history of the school. And we calculated that about 6% of applicants became members of the school. So it's a very competitive process. More specifically, with regard to the demographics of the school, we are very proud that, as in years past, we are at gender parity and indeed with a slight edge for women in the school. The extraordinary work that will be getting underway this year includes an exploration of the relationship between non-state and state actors in the context of political violence through a case study of the #EndSARS protests against political brutality in Nigeria, ethnographic writing on gun culture, militias, and right-wing politics in the United States, an account of predatory financial inclusion of Ecuadorian immigrants in Spain, and these immigrants' political engagements in the face of their over-indebtedness, a study of the caring and labor practices of a community of Syrian underage waste pickers growing up in a Beirut scrapyard, a comparative examination of movements that try to resist and expand democratic rights in Latin America, Europe, and the United States, a historical study of the quote unquote eugenics nexus between social sciences, molecular genetics, and assisted reproductive technologies in the mid-20th century, and a book on Black women in the struggle for human rights from the era of emancipation from slavery in the United States, so 1865, to the present. So an extraordinary breadth of work, and that's just 20% of the work that will be done in our school this year. Our school has several key activities. First is that each scholar is welcome to pursue their individual work and what has been called, as Robert mentioned, a paradise for scholars. There are also many opportunities in the school to think together. There's a weekly seminar during which faculty, members, and visitors in the school share their research, and on Monday mornings followed by lunch together. Somewhat similar to our colleagues in some of the other schools, and in mathematics in particular, we organize some of our work around a theme. We have a fortnightly theme seminar, and as I mentioned, this year's theme is political mobilizations and social movements. The theme last year was science and the state, and members of that seminar will gather back at the school later this fall to develop a collective project. We also encourage members, as they wish, to organize reading groups around new books, around articles about their own works in progress as they wish. 7 years ago, our school began to address the lack of representation in our applicants and members from certain regions of the world through the establishment of a summer program in social science led by D.A. Fasson. In 2-year cycles, 2 weeks here at the Institute, and in alternating years, including abroad, including in Colombia and South Africa, colleagues joined together. These are talented early career scholars, most from the Global South, and we hope to be able to welcome them back to campus this year after a hiatus last year owing to the pandemic. There are many modalities of community building and making. Some of them are structured, and you can imagine and create what you will at the Institute, and we are really here to help you accomplish your aspirations for your time here and for your work. While you are welcome to participate in the many opportunities that will be presented, you are also at full liberty to devote yourself fully to your work. We hope that all members across all of the schools will find a modality and a pace of work that allows you to fulfill your highest aspirations for your intellectual creativity. The African-American poet Lucille Clifton has a meditation on wonder that I want to wrap with. So in an interview in 2010 with Poets and Writers, she said, "I don't write out of what I know, I write out of what I wonder. I think most artists create art in order to explore, not to give the answers. Poetry and art are not about the answers to me, they are about the questions." Obviously, all of us are here in this room because of what we know, because of some demonstrated expertise, excellence, or eminence in the intellectual work that we have done thus far in our lives. So let's stipulate that. But Clifton reminds us that it's important to ask as many questions as we answer, and it is important, yes, to wonder. So one final reflection on wonder. Max Weber, the social scientist who's foundational to the work of so many of us, introduced the concept of disenchantment, foundational to social theory, a sort of idea that as a consequence of the emergence of modernity, of rationalization, of the secularization in social life, that we become disenchanted, that the magic, the mystery, the ritual of life falls away. There is much today, as Robert suggested, that disenchants us in the social world. political conflict, existential climate crisis, racist violence, gender inequality, and more. In this context and in this year, we might be reminded of a kind of social science of wonder, a kind of human science of wonder. To wonder is a luxury and a privilege, and we are also fortunate to be in community together this year to think anew. That is the mission of our work in the School of Social Science every year, and this year in particular. And I am delighted that our school and that across the Institute, we get to wonder and work together. Thank you and welcome.
Hello, everybody. My name is Camillo Dell'Ellis, and I am a faculty at the School of Mathematics. And in fact, for many of the IAS families, I'm just the father of Gregorio. I welcome all IAS members, and in particular, the new and old ones in our school. The School of Mathematics is actually quite large. It has a lot of members. And after a couple of months that I was over here, I felt like we owe an apology to the members of the other schools, because I think they come over here with the idea that mathematicians and theoretical computer scientists are in general geeky, shy, and quiet. And while there might be some truth concerning the first two adjectives, you will actually soon discover that some mathematicians and some computer scientists are obnoxiously loud. Especially given the last 18 months of no or very dull interactions due to the COVID pandemic, I actually very much hope that our members will enjoy the renewed opportunities to many fruitful in-person seminars, conversations, and collaborations. In fact, the youngest members in the School of Mathematics will be reminded ad nauseam by their advisors that they should not be shy, get around, and ask a lot of questions. Now, that said, let me, however, caution you that this is not an invitation to let your guard down. So COVID-19 is still around, still making victims, and so please keep being cautious and respect all our rules. Also because if you don't do, our staff is actually typically complaining with me. Each year, roughly a third of the members of the School of Mathematics focus on a particular topic. And this time, it is the so-called H principle in analysis and geometry. I refrain from telling you what that is, since the organizers of this special program actually happen to be among the loudest mathematicians I know. So I'm pretty sure that you will, at a certain point, learn about it whether you want it or not. Another pillar of our activities is our large postdoc programs. In fact, more than half of our members are in a postdoctoral position. And as it is tradition, for the first 2 weeks, starting from this week, they will all introduce themselves and their research to the whole school. These are what we call the short postdoc talks. And after them, all the regular seminars will start and go on in full gear. There are many seminars that specialize in various aspects of mathematics and theoretical computer science. But let me bring to the attention of our members the weekly event, which is meant for the whole schools, which is the members' colloquium nantis. Now, let me give a few words also about the older members of the school. There are currently 6 faculty, so 6 permanent professors in the school, but we also have a number of visiting professors each year. And in particular, let me wish a fruitful stay to the ones who are with us now or in the next semester. And those are Amol Agarwal, Tonyan Pitassi, Laszlo Zekai-Hidi, Karen Uhlenbeck, and Lai Sang-Yang. Last year, I concluded my welcome with a somewhat ominous quote from my friend and colleague Helmut Hofer. So he said, "Don't be afraid of failure, and if you are too excited about your result, remember that it is most likely wrong." Now, that's a bit ominous. So let me actually tell you what once my postdoc advisor told me when I showed him what was supposed to be the proof of something that we were after. He told me, well, Camillo, this really looks too good to be true, but wait till tomorrow before checking the details so that tonight we can still celebrate. Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Misha Tsodiks. I'll say a few words about our School of Natural Sciences. And as you will see, probably compared to, especially to the social sciences and history, the level of speech making will be much lower. So, well, we are quite a big school, and we have basically 3 main divisions. We have elementary particles division, we have cosmology, and we have a more recent addition, which is system biology. And when I was thinking of how to present what we do to the general community of the Institute, I thought that I should probably not talk too much about concrete projects because this is too special and difficult for many of you to understand. Maybe I'll just say that in general, what we are trying to do is we're trying to understand things in universe or in life, which are too different from what we can see with our senses, and so very difficult to understand without the help of mathematics. So basically, what people try to do in our school is to try to understand the universe at the completely different scales, where things look very different, and they're in no way just a scaled up or scaled down version of the world that we see every day. But somehow remarkably, mathematics can describe them with a great precision, even though mathematics by itself is created by people. So that's one of these wonders that I think one of these philosophical issues that I think I'm very often think about, and it's by no way can be taken for granted. So this refers both to very microscopic scales and at the scale of the whole universe. So if you really come to the school, of course, there are many seminars, and but mostly what you'll see is people just writing equations on the blackboards and discussing around them. So that's a very striking image that I had when I first time entered into the building 2 years ago, when I was contemplating moving here. And this is basically the main thing I can say about the atmosphere in the school. Just non-stop discussions around the mathematical equations that describe the world in a very different scales than what we are used for. And I have to say something also about this more recent unit, which is the system biology unit. So the idea there is basically to try to recreate the success that physicists have in understanding life. And that's, of course, a very ambitious goal. Life is by itself is a more recent phenomenon than the universe. And it's evolving with a heartbreaking speed and faster and faster. So in a time scale which is really like a split second on the life of a universe, it went through a huge transformations, and especially if you think about humans that only appeared on the planet maybe like 1 million years ago, and only right about 40,000 years ago they developed some cognition and language. And here we are now, where humans developed all this beautiful technology, including and also the math that can be used to understand things to this amazing degree. And so the hope is that we can use this physics approach, physical and mathematical approach, to try to understand also something about life at the level of mathematical equations. I would like just to complete my brief presentations to say that we would really like to have some more connections to other schools. So obviously we have very good connections to the math school, but in terms of history and social science, I think there is some unexplored potential here. And I would just want to encourage our colleagues to maybe visit us more often, and don't be scared of mathematical equations, but see if we can really find something to talk about. I think there is a lot here to explore. Thank you. Let me thank my 4 colleagues by being so eloquent, each in a completely different way about their schools. I think this is, we could talk forever about history and the present and the future. I think it's much better to do that outdoors with a nice drink and some food. It's lovely weather. So thank you so much for attending this official opening ceremony. I think now we should enjoy ourselves. So see you outside.